this has been the moment that a lot of businesses have been waiting for. Like, we have all this potential impact we could be making. I can't think of another technology in our lifetime outside of cell phones that has been everywhere, everything all at once.
The more data you feed into an AI, clearly the more intelligent it gets, but then that obviously then breeds more risk.
We've never come across a construct like this yet. Data is just like a casualty of that.
This is where I think we really should start to, probably lose a little bit of sleep. Hi, Mike. Thanks for being here today. You and I were discussing the other day in our prep for this around talking about where organizations are on their journey of AI and where we are as a society with dealing with AI. So I just thought it would be useful, interesting to sort of explore some of these topics and go into a bit more detail. I was, interestingly, just to sort of kick things off, I guess, I was at a conference last week and I had the fortunate situation to be able to host a room of about 22 CISOs, all different organizations all over Europe. And we were talking about AI, we were around the room, and what was really interesting was to hear them all explain where they are on their journey. And I think everybody's at different stages of maturity now. I had an individual sitting next to me who was telling me that, we're full speed ahead and we've got agents everywhere and we've got RAG pipelines and, integrating with our databases and all this. And the guy next to him is like, yeah, we're using Copilot. So, it really is. I guess you've seen this. I guess you're hearing this as well.
Yeah, very much. I mean, the saying the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. It comes to mind when it comes to this AI workforce. And I mean, honestly, it's really hard to wrap your head around just the speed of development in general in AI, let alone the security of AI. And so it's you see a lot of companies very risk tolerant and who expect to be risk tolerant, but then what's happening in practice at the org level is very different than what the policies may say or what they want to happen. And it is something I've seen quite a bit. Is I think we're still, in terms of AI and then the security of it, I think we're very early on in the days of where, how much you know about it and how much your willingness to tinker with it and explore and test and break things is directly related to your ability to have a good outcome with it.
Yeah.
And we're not at a point yet where it just works like magic. It very much matters what you put in is what you get out.
Yeah, and I'm sure it sort of comes down to a bit of the skills situation inside your organization as well, and where it's being driven from. I mean, we've heard examples. Microsoft went really public a couple of years ago with Copilot, and I think a lot of boards jumped on this and thought we need to be innovating and dealing with our competition because we're going to fall behind. And suddenly, IT teams, security teams were being sort of somewhat forced into this route.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see where some companies are really adopting it now and starting to see some real use cases for it. We talk about this concept of the AI paradox. And the AI paradox can be explained in a number of ways. It could be, from a holistic perspective, the fear with humanity that AI is going to take over and are we ready to adopt it? But we look at it from the sense that organizations, I think, in the most part, know they want to adopt AI. But AI obviously relies on data. It relies on identity, and it relies on the data that feeds it. And the paradox really comes in that organizations have an immense amount of data. They've been gathering it for years. And really, there's a real sense of concern and caution about opening up data to AI. And so what we're hearing is that the paradox situation is that maybe sort of 3% of the data that an enterprise owns is actually being ingested and fed into models of AI. And so if you think about it, the more data you feed into an AI, clearly the more intelligent it gets, but then that obviously then breeds more risk.
Right.
So I think we're at this quandary at the moment about how we can get past this point.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, a lot of companies have kind of realized just how either insufficient their current data security strategy is, or even their identity strategy when it comes to deploying something like a Copilot. I've heard it referred to as an unexpected pen test when you go and deploy these features, just because you give it a certain level of access to go and see across things. And the thing that it's the best at is that correlation and that, connecting things that, perhaps a human may not be able to derive from. But I agree with you. It's one of those things where this has been the moment that a lot of businesses have been waiting for. Like, hey, we have all this untold data. We have all this potential revenue. We have all this potential impact we could be making, which is why we're feeling such a push from, every industry, every line of business.
Yep.
It's top down and it's bottom up. I can't think of another technology in our lifetime outside of cell phones, which had a slower adoption curve, that has been everywhere, everything all at once. Like, it's personal, it's business. There is no line between that world anymore. And it is improving outcomes in a lot of places, but it kind of goes back to, well, is the data I'm even giving it useful? Is the data, is it the right data? And that's, is it secure? That's a whole different set of conversations. And it's never an easy thing to find out, because I think historically companies haven't really had the ability to determine just how good or bad some of this stuff is, because it's never been used in this manner. There's a lot to uncover.
Yeah, you said a great thing to me the other day. I think you said that AI has made us realize that we're just terrible at securing and managing data.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because immediately you see what AI is meant to be helpful, like the LLMs especially. They're meant to help you achieve the next task. They want to go do it, and so if they have the ability to, they will do it. And these model evaluations have shown time and time and again that they will reach the goal by any means necessary effectively. And data is just like a casualty of that.
Yes, absolutely. I've been talking to organizations that are sort of, somewhat down that maturity curve, and starting to see now that they have agents that are sort of designed and segmented somewhat to do one particular task, perhaps talking to another agent to better fulfill a question or a prompt that it doesn't have the ability to answer. And suddenly they're realizing that they're actually starting to be completely autonomous now and non-deterministic in a way of being able to find, like you say, find the answers from a data set that I don't have access to, but I know a colleague that does from an agent's perspective as well. So I think starting to make companies really realize that we've really got to get our shit in order.
No, I agree. And, and it also brings up the concept of, like, what is an agent? What is it really? What is it not? What's the blast radius of what it can access? And it's never, we've never come across a construct like this yet, where other than perhaps like a super admin kind of level person having the ability to kind of go and do all these things really without any kind of consequences, because it's something that's not deterministic, or something that doesn't have the same level of repeatability on a given task. By the very nature of what it does, it's going to be hard to constrain without a ton of guardrails. And I think we realized very quickly that there still needs to be some guardrails, but it's this dual-edged sword, similar to a paradox situation, is that you have to give it enough to make it useful, otherwise, and get out of the way. Otherwise, you'll never see the value of some of these things, or the purported value.
Yes, and I suppose the flip side of that is that you've got to make sure that the data that it's feeding or learning from is the right data.
Right.
Because inevitably, if it's learning from stuff that it shouldn't, that will lead further down the line to, hallucinations and all sorts of things we don't want.
Right.
A few years ago, this is it was a fascinating conversation. I was talking to a very large car manufacturer, and they've been building vehicles, all sorts of vehicles for years and years and years. And they've got robots in their factories welding and building these machines. And every time it does a task, it generates a piece of telemetry. It goes into a log file somewhere.
Yeah.
And they've been storing this stuff for 20, 30 years, just loads of it, petabytes of this information. And I remember talking to them a few years ago, and they were really at the mindset where they're starting to build up to that point where we need to get rid of it. We need to delete it. We just don't need it. It's costing us money. It has no value to us as a business. We've never looked at it, of course. And so they went through this exercise of thinking, how can we actually invoke this whole disposition conversation, which is terrifying for every company around the world, of course. No one likes deleting anything.
Right.
But here we are, full circle, a few years later. They're now building the next generation, the next evolution of the robots. And they're thinking to themselves, well, we've got masses of data that we've learned from that perhaps we could use to train the next generation and use in a very intelligent way to, rather than us starting from scratch and just writing code, they could actually learn it from what's been successful and what's not worked before.
Right.
So suddenly all of that information becomes incredibly valuable. And I'm not telling companies, don't delete your data, your data. Please get rid of
data retention.
Everybody has a policy. No one invokes it. But it's interesting that suddenly that information becomes valuable nowadays.
Yeah. And honestly, you hear companies hear stories like that, or they think it's possible in their business that's probably not as like directly connected to physical manufacturing. Maybe it's just a regular SaaS business, and they're like, we can do the exact same thing if we just give it enough training signals and customer signals and UX signals and things like that. And I think it's all possible, but it kind of goes back to then the smart application of it, and how are you feeding it the right way, and then how do you make sure that it's even working on useful things, let alone the security of it, and like what can then become true as a result of the kind of unfettered access to that at the agent level, but also at the human level too, because now it's pretty much everybody's using agents or some coding LLM or some IDE platform that has AI built into it to do even the most basic tasks now, because you can, so why not? And so it's really quite a challenge to how do you govern something that's that big and changing all the time.
Well, so how answer me this then? How do organizations get their shit together and make sure that they're in a good place to do this stuff?
Well, it's not easy. I would say just number one, just accept that it's a little bit more challenging than some probably other tech revolutions you've tried to work through. It doesn't mean you have to start from scratch. It doesn't mean you throw everything out that you've done in the past.
Okay.
But I also at the same time believe that you can't just do the same old things. Like you can't just have a governance meeting once a month with a cross-functional team and you write a PDF and you take notes and everybody goes on. That won't work. Something that changes, if you follow along on Twitter by the hour, sometimes it changes.
Yeah.
And what's possible also changes. Like it's never been, technology's never evolved that quick. So, I always say like, hey, you need to be leaning into more of like, actually using the technology to govern the technology where you can, like in a smart way.
Sure.
But you also have to just lean into like, how are your business teams using it? So don't start it from like a tech standpoint or a security standpoint. You'll get there. But most of the time, tech teams are brought in because they're the only ones who either deploy the thing or can see the thing that has been deployed. They have the visibility, they have the access, or they have the trust around the level, so it's great. You can see stuff, but that's just one part of it. Now you have to figure out, okay, why are we using it? What's the point of this? What are the business cases for this? What line of businesses are actually driving some of the biggest adoption, not just, make more spreadsheets faster. There's got to be a reason you're pushing on some of these things, and that's the teams you go with and find out like what are you doing, how do you speed it up, what do you need versus what do you don't need, kind of things, and kind of work backward from a use case standpoint. And it'll be slow, and it'll take some time, but you'll get into the rhythm of how it works and how you want to get people to be sharp enough to use this without needing to go check like a 10-page document every time about can I do this every single time? Or do I have to ping somebody on Slack to say, is this all right? There's got to be a smarter way to enable people to use this newfound tool, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, you hear a lot of companies now have their AI adoption committees. And I think it's a really sensible approach because from what I've seen, there are different individuals from different backgrounds within the business all coming together. You've got, the risk people that are inevitably going to turn up. You've got, legal, you've got the finance people, you've got, like you say, the technical people, the security people, but people who can innovate as well and think about how they can. And I think that's been really helpful for a lot of companies that actually have a group of minds come together to start to think about, how can we use this to make our life a bit easier? And then you've got hopefully the security and the risk people trying to implement some guardrails and practice around it. But I guess the caveat to that is, like you say, it's moving so quickly. And if I want to suddenly start building a new agent because I've got an idea of how it can, streamline a workflow, for example, I don't want to go through hours and hours of getting approval, and I'm just going to do it.
Committed, yeah. And that's the thing, people can just do it now in ways that they couldn't before. It's the concept of like everything is permitted unless expressly prohibited. And that's like never been more true. You can just go build a prototype, you can just go commit your own code, you can do anything you want. So it's an incredible time to be building anything, or even if you've never been a builder before, it's an incredible time to be able to step in and put your ideas into something that you can actually touch and feel and see.
Yes.
And so you kind of have to come back to like giving people concepts and approaches to doing these things and giving them a way to either highlight what they want to do in risk, but not in a way that slows them down. And some of the best companies I've seen do this kind of build ways to just more like the guardrail or like the paved road kind of idea. Like, yes, you can build as many agents as you want, but this way, like through here.
Okay.
Start here, do that, and then go build whatever you like. Or, hey, if we're going to use these tools, they have to go through this kind of CI/CD pipeline to get checked, no matter what you put.
Okay.
This is give them ways to say like yes without you being in the middle of it, and then catch it kind of on the back end.
But still have technical controls in place.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's interesting.
Exactly. Not AI controls, technical controls that check the AI.
And not well, governance controls as well, I suppose. One of the things that sort of came out of this big sort of conference thing that I went to last week was, we're very controlled in our delivery of AI. We have a committee. We're very very concerned that we have to stay compliant. There's all sorts of frameworks. There's the EU AI and there's NIST, and they're popping up as they always do all around the world now. And a lot of it has been driven from that compliance perspective. You know, if you want to develop an AI, fill in a form, come see us, agree that you're not going to ingest information that you shouldn't, and it's not going to start exfiltrating information that it shouldn't, and we'll give you the tick and off you go and do it.
Right.
And I think that's sort of given some companies a warm, fuzzy feeling that they're doing it from a compliance perspective. But when I say to them, okay, well, what about the stuff that you're building that they aren't going through this?
Right. And it is happening.
It is happening. And I think a lot of them were like, would they do that? And they're like, well, yeah, they would. They
every
would.
time.
And they're going to want to train those agents. They're going to want to make them intelligent. And how do you make them intelligent? It's going to be on data sets. So where they're going to get the data set, they're not going to build a whole new data set. They're going to take it from somewhere that you as an organization.
Yeah.
And so you need to think about what information is it learning from. And so technical controls, I think, are becoming mandatory now to try and deliver this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, compliance still matters, of course. And, businesses often, when they think about security, they actually mean compliance, because compliance has teeth. Right. And there's a start and stop.
Yeah.
There's a framework. You can get fined. There are like real end states when it comes to compliance, where security is never done. It's ongoing. It's evolving, same way like most of tech is. And so, okay, maybe breaches happen, maybe stock goes down, maybe customers angry, but next quarter stock back up, customers happy, everybody's forgiven, next breach has already happened. And so there's a direct correlation too of like, if a company gets breached, like their stock doesn't even drop that much anymore if they're a public company, unless it's like truly big.
Yes.
But even still, like 2 quarters later,
we're back
up.
Yeah.
So you have this, yes, you still have to keep it in mind, because there's certain, regulatory things that each business has to do depending on what industry they're in. But there is always, the tip of the kind of iceberg on that front. So like you can still do a lot of things in security world under the name of compliance, but like you can't just do like the bare minimum of like, yeah, we check the things like that won't fly eventually with auditors, that won't fly with customers. And,
yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. If the data's stolen, you can't turn around and say, well, we were EUIA, so we're all good.
Yeah.
So,
except for that part.
Except for that little bit there. Yeah. Missing. Okay, interesting. So let's think about the audience that are potentially watching this. We're going to have people coming from different backgrounds, different ages. We all age. I believe you mean it catches up with all of us. And there are people with different levels of understanding. Let's take it back. What is an agent? Let's try and decipher this one, because I know you've had conversations about it before, and just trying to get to the nub of what actually is an agent.
Yeah, I think this is really important, but a hard conversation to have. And it almost comes down to the fact of like, how can you define what an agent is not first?
Okay.
And saying like, well, it's something that can't act on a set of instructions by itself, or something that doesn't have access to perform a set of instructions, or make outbound calls, or make like web fetches, or anything like that by itself. And you get a little bit more clear on, okay, then I guess if anything can do that, or any other thing can do that, well, then that's a form of an agent. So
yes.
As early on, they'll say like, well, an agent's only, what you build, which large companies and tech companies build and then you use, as opposed to, well, an agent could be just a set of, an API call that from a frontier model, combined with a bunch of other access and abilities to, query internal data, query external data,
right,
make its own database, perform all these actions and have all this level of access. And that layout becomes very kind of heterogeneous across the world. So it's very hard to determine like what is one agent versus another. Like there's some easy buckets you could say, like, a coding agent, or like Claude Code or things like that. Like, okay, that's clearly a version of an agent, but what about the agent that's, alongside your SaaS platform, or like your Salesforce agent? Is that an agent? Oh yeah, it's a type of agent. And so there's like shades of agents that, like 50 Shades of Agents is the is the book that somebody will write one day about the different types of agents and all the mischievous things they get up to.
I dread to think what's in that book.
Me too, actually. Nobody write that, please.
No.
Actually, they'll probably just have an agent write it. But I think, helping organizations even understand that, like, hey, your exposure radius is probably way, way worse than you believe. If you believe having unregistered agents or agents you don't know about is a concern for you, because it can potentially be, a few things or very complex things together, running constantly, or running on demand, or running at when someone calls it to do something. So there's, I think, we're still figuring out as an industry kind of what that is, and then where the technical guardrails go across that, because that's the only way we're going to be able to kind of wrap our heads around it. So, most companies I talk to now are still in that discovery phase. So what's out there, what's the known universe, and then how quickly is it changing? Yeah.
So do you think then that we have different levels of intelligent agents? I mean, I suppose the amount of autonomy you give them can sort of decipher how intelligent they can become or learn, but I guess you run the risk if you have an agent that isn't as intelligent as perhaps another one should, and you're giving it data that it shouldn't be learning on. I mean, how do you measure the level of intelligence that an agent can have?
Well, I think it's hard to kind of measure that too, just because, ever since ChatGPT and some of these earlier ones came out, they were already, more intelligent than most humans, combined. And so they're way past having the world's knowledge in their availability. And this is just the publicly available LLM models, not to mention any of the more private models or like custom models people are making on their own, or open source things. And I think it really comes down to what's the kind of intended action or series of things you want this agent to be able to do. Is it meant to run by itself, meaning is it in loops and achieve tasks? And is it meant to just monitor things and take action? Or is it meant to be kind of a coding partner with you as well? And yeah, I mean, data absolutely matters, and a lot of it comes down to cost. So I think the early days of the people trying to figure out, which agent's the right agents or which models are the right models comes down to cost, and that kind of backs into well, who's spending what where,
right?
And how do we curb and control some of that as well? Which is an important conversation to have. It's just like the early days of cloud, where do you really need that 256 gig RAM server, or would the 8 gig RAM one work for your model, and then you can spin up and down when you want to?
Yes.
So we're having that moment for sure when it comes to just AI in general, but yeah, especially agents, especially ones that can be left unconstrained and give you a very big bill at the end.
Well, talking about constraints, I mean, we're very much talking at the moment from AI being built and developed within an enterprise, inside an organization. But obviously, AI is available to everybody, including nefarious individuals and people who want to cause harm and havoc. They have no guardrails, they have no compliance they have to adhere to.
Right.
And it's inevitable that there's AI initiatives and agents out there now performing tasks that are desired to cause pain and destruction. And we are. I think a lot of organizations are starting to realize now, I talk a lot about this, about, we need to think about how we can use AI to defend ourselves.
Yeah.
Really, because, we've had many, many examples in the press recently. We're using Claude to hack into various things. I've read a guy who used, I think, just the Gen AI Claude prompting and managed to trick it to bypass guardrails to break into multiple Mexican government agencies. Did you see that? And then he tried to open up an account with OpenAI, and I think Claude rung them and said, you need to block this guy, and they went okay, and they stopped it. So guardrails can be bypassed if you want to. I mean, I think they've all been bypassed now. So this is where I think we really should start to probably lose a little bit of sleep about how do we as a constrained part of society, in terms of trying to deliver this in a safe way, deal with that part of the world that don't have the constraints. And then you talked about the cost associated with it. Well, if we're talking about rogue nations and APTs, they're going to be potentially government backed, and there's endless amounts of money available to perform these tasks if there's going to be a very successful end game. So we talk about, and it's been spoken about before, but we're in a situation now where it is robots versus robots.
Yeah.
That's how we should be looking at it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like a good framing to think about it too. And I'm always reminded of like someone made a meme a couple years ago about how like the defenders are mad that the attackers didn't follow their framework and stay within their guidelines. Like, oh, you didn't do this like we were supposed to. Like,
Yes.
we had a whole framework around this,
Right.
and you didn't follow it. And this is just that now multiplied by
Absolutely.
100x. And so, no, I agree. I mean, it's an incredible time to be able to be using these tools to see what you can do, automate it, and just there's always been a human kind of bottleneck constraint in security in general. Just the ability to either understand, process, ingest, like make sense of these any log data, and then try to answer that one question, like, are we impacted? If so, how much and how bad, and how deep does it go? And so now there's a lot of companies and just a lot of people who are just putting an effort into figuring these things out and how to automate and use AI tools to either continuously look for things or continuously improve things. I mean, I think it's incredible. And yeah, if you're not thinking about that in your IT or cyber program, like you have a huge miss. And there's so much you can do with enterprise companies and like with the models directly yourselves. And I think you should be using both as much as possible.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I've 30 years working in cyber. It's all I've ever done, and we've always been playing catch up. I mean, that's what's driven the world of security, not just cyber, but physical and all sorts of security. We're constantly there finding new ways to bypass whatever we put in place. And I guess recently I was sort of thinking that playing catch up is they're so far ahead now that we just don't stand a chance. But you're saying that perhaps we stand a possibility now of actually on a level playing field somewhat, if we can start to be adopt it in a way that they have and to be able to defend ourselves. Then are you telling me that we stand a chance?
I mean, I'm an optimist, so yeah, I think so. I think we're a long ways from that collectively. I think it kind of goes back to the ability to use it early on and the ability of companies to support kind of the forward-leaning concepts of using it to do things that humans did manually or that we just knew at all.
Yes.
So it's going to require kind of a lot of things to go right for a lot of companies to really take advantage of it. And it goes back to some of these companies will be a lot better off than others, just based on their business model or things like that. I mean, there will always, mostly be, weak links no matter where you are. And, even the spree of breaches in the UK have been, largely just humans compromising other humans and not doing some untold, 30-year-old vulnerability. And so, and that's still the way a lot of cyber works. So there are ways, we can help on some of the technical side, but there's, we still have to consider, what will still be true, even with all the money we spend in tech and cyber and on both sides. And so, I'm still optimistic that many of the problems will go away, but I think we'll still have some core ones that become, brighter as we go on.
So we could preempt attacks then if we start to use AI now.
Yeah, I think theoretically there are some companies who are doing kind of like preemptive takedown defense of like phishing, infrastructure and things like that, which I think is great. The ISPs and like the big companies, like cloud providers, are doing a lot of that, and I think that'll only increase. Of course, we're always dealing with kind of irrational actors at this point and we don't know what they'll do next, and we're always playing catch up, and so there will have to be a lot of an adjustment. But hopefully, the cycle time between the defender's adjustments and the attacker's adjustments like shortcuts very, very quickly, whereas it may take months or years for us to catch up on the defender side for some of these things. But I think it's possible.
Okay, but do you think that we'll always need the human in the loop?
I think the human will change, like where they sit, what they do, and all that. And then I do think there will be states of the world where there won't be needed in that more. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I'm not even talking about job loss or destruction or anything like that, but just more things that are much more suited for connectivity and around system to system or AI to AI, or are going to be probably a lot more common on some things. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. The elephant in the room situation is that we are dealing with vulnerabilities that are somewhat thrust upon us. We adopt these operating systems, we adopt these cloud infrastructures, these SaaS applications, and so we are reliant on these big organizations and these people that provide this to patch. And in this world now of just how fast things are developing and being found out, should we be pressurizing them and expecting them to move that much faster? And let's not wait 3-4 months or the mid-year patch cycle to come around to fix this stuff now?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting concept too, because it's also the open source community as well.
Okay. Tend to move a bit quicker though, don't they?
They can, but it's funny, you see, even some of the more, like even OpenClaw before it was acquired by Anthropic was like, well, hey, I didn't make it this way, so stop sending me bug reports.
Yes.
And it was just, hey, I don't want to deal with this. This is not a thing.
Fair enough.
And then, that is even aside from like large companies who have kind of a bigger responsibility and like financial incentive to do it too. But yeah, I think all the bottlenecks should be able to be shortened, at least at this point. But it's an interesting, fact that, since most of the code now is being written by AI assisted coding agents, they're the ones creating the vulnerabilities now because they've been trained on vulnerable code.
Of them?
If their entire corpus of training is based on vulnerable code that we've had for X many years, like it's hard to generate it. And I think, yes, we still need to be able to produce these patches and maybe to go quicker. And like I would expect more, almost like a continuous release kind of cycle on some of these things. I think we'll find a lot more like kind of devastating level, hey, you got to replace this entire device kind of thing. Or like, hey, I'm sorry, user, you have 20 reboots today from all the patches you have.
Right.
There's got to be a better way to kind of get around that, I think. But
so we need a very agile change control committee now,
I think so.
You're telling me.
Yeah, super agile, but then also just much quicker to release to value, just because it just can't sit there for so long. Because now, once it's known, like it's no longer 0 day.
Yeah.
Like it is now discovered and available.
Yes, and we do have choices. We have choices of hyperscalers, we have choices of data lakes, and I suppose it's those are the ones that are going to come out on top that are showing that they are being agile and developing and fixing these patches now, and they don't have to sit on and wait. Well, we've got to wait a month. We get it in a month's time.
Exactly. Yeah, it's table stakes. Like I think more so now than it ever was, and I'm not just saying that as a security person. I think like it has to be that way now.
Yeah,
to do business at all.
And it sort of moves on to this thing that happened recently with Mythos. Obviously, Mythos came out and Claude came out and said, Anthropic, I think, wasn't it? We have Mythos. It's a language model. It's finding every risk and every vulnerability out there almost instantaneously. I know you had some comments about this, whether it was a little bit of a hype. I know some people have looked at it, but it's inevitable that we're going to have AI to be able to find these vulnerabilities in almost instantaneously. And then we talked about 0 day. I think those days have gone, haven't they? It's 0 hour, 0 minute, instant committing on a vulnerability that's been found. But the Mythos stuff is really thrown a bit of a cat amongst the pigeons, hasn't it? In terms of people trying to think that we're up against it now.
Yeah, I think it was interesting the way it's been rolled out. I mean, I think it's a little bit of marketing hype, a little bit of clever language, but I think is kind of the most responsible. They could have disclosed some of these things and working with Project Glasswing and getting some companies involved. Right. I think it's a step, but it's also if anyone's been paying attention in the AI world, like the capabilities just get replicated by another lab within a week or so. And it's already happened, and the community's already rallied around, hey, there's lots of open source models that can do the exact same thing. It's a matter about intention. It's a matter about time. It's a matter of focus. You could argue that nation states have all of the above for whatever target they want.
Sure.
Of course, not everybody's a nation state target. At least they weren't. So who knows how that calculus changes? But I think it just shone a really big light on the fact that. And a lot of people don't realize that finding the vulnerabilities has never been like the most challenging part. It's the concept of fixing it and people's and priorities and business value around whether or not they even engage in that activity at all, let alone like discover it. So it's now the backlog might be 10 million vulnerabilities today. It'll be 100 million tomorrow, and I don't know how much that changes in actual businesses' day-to-day operations on some of these things. Especially when all businesses, then the tide kind of rises all of them up, and then we all have billions of vulnerabilities in our backlog that are untenable and unfixable. So I don't think it'll, and you can see already in the public markets kind of responses, like stock market freaked out every time Anthropic mentioned something about security, but then the bounce back time has gotten shorter each time.
Yeah,
they release a new thing like, oh well, yeah, everyone's kind of doing this. Oh, this is not that big a deal. Or it's not as hyped up as we thought it was. And, this is kind of the first, I would say, pushback with Mythos that the security community was kind of saying, this doesn't feel right exactly. And also this is a bit overhyped around how security works and how incentives work in companies.
Mm.
But at least people are paying more attention now, and I think that's probably a good overall picture, is that people are paying more attention. But now it's still the same bottleneck of like, yeah, but what do you do with it, and is it worth doing something with at all? I think is another big piece. And then you remove kind of like just like enterprise companies and like maybe like large companies that don't have any ties into critical national infrastructure. Okay, that's one large group of companies. But what about the ones that can't do anything about these vulnerabilities, for either because they have public funding from grants, or they have limited people, or the manufacturers who make the physical components can't do anything about it? Like that's where they're going to target, not like 100 different Linux distributions or things like that. Like, so it does kind of shine like, hey, this is still, it's like well intentioned, but just not the right focus for probably the greater societal risk.
Yeah. Well, maybe, I mean, is there a possibility we could start to close the gap on some of these vulnerabilities? Someone was talking to me recently about, you compare the world of cyber with maybe the airline industry, and the amount of vulnerabilities and risks and issues that they find within, planes and is that they are fixed. They have to be fixed because obviously there's a knock-on effect, and so the gap gets closed very, very, very quickly. But in the cyber world, there's a lot of risk acceptance. There's a lot of like you say, there's things that we can't do, but maybe we could start to close that gap a little bit. Or maybe do we just say to the point that, well, we'll be constantly chasing our tails, so why even try and fix them? And let's just have a level of intelligence from an AI perspective, just constantly checking and making sure that no one is trying to abuse or try and compromise these vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I think there'll be that, and I also think it'll actually make us make a lot more sense of what the backlog actually should be and what the priority should be. I think that's a great application of AI with security. It's like, okay, you maybe have 10 million, but only 20 of them actually matter, because these are the ones that actually are customer facing or internet facing or things like that don't, they have remote code execution and can be exploited now. Like those are the ones to focus on now. The rest of them, they have other controls, or too many other things have to be true, which means game over already if they get this far.
Yes.
So I think it's incredible. It'll be incredibly useful at doing things like that, and then it'll help us focus. Like it's funny to say that, like, oh, we need more data to focus, but that's basically what AI will help, I think, the security community do at large. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking for the next innovation of AI honeypots. That's what I was thinking about recently. We have honeypots, and I think they probably serve a purpose. I don't know how effective they are nowadays, but that sounds like a great initiative, doesn't it? To have an AI honeypot that's just sitting there waiting for some, agentic framework to come along, and I can trick it into thinking that I'm a real system, and that would be I think that's another level we should be thinking about.
No, I agree. I think I've heard the term AI labyrinth as well. Send it down a bunch of different routes to make it burn a bunch of tokens, a bunch of time, a bunch of think it's getting far, and only to realize it's not.
Costing them money as well, of course. Yeah, right.
Because it comes down to financial incentives all around, like defenders and attackers. So if you can make it financially untenable, then that's, I think, the goal for a lot of security leaders I know, like, think about it in terms of that, like, how do we make ourselves like more expensive to attack than the next person,
right,
or the next company. I don't know that it always works, but like it's an interesting kind of mental framework for saying, like, how do I apply, like, or exhaust their resources such that it's not worth it to that effect. So
yes,
we'll see how that goes.
So this has been interesting because we sort of talked about that enterprise side of it, and then we talked about obviously the threat side of it. And I was reading something recently that I think you wrote around. There's security for AI, and there's AI for security. And I think it touches on both of them really. And I think I remember if I recall, security for AI is just security. Yeah, it's just another thing that we have to secure. But AI for security is where we should be thinking about how we can start to expect big changes and start to really embrace that stuff as well.
Yeah, and when I was looking at that, I kind of track a bunch of data with return on security, and I look at where the money's being invested and who's being acquired and things like that. And I think when AI first came on the scene in the world, people were like, okay, we have to secure the chat agents. Like that's all AI was to the general public. And like, oh, we have to secure these things and make sure that they don't give up their secrets and don't give up their models and don't give their like system prompts and things like that people can steal it. And then I think the industry quickly realized, well, there's only so many companies who will buy these things. And actually there's a gigantic market of just using AI to accelerate existing security things.
Right.
And you can see the data kind of shifting towards that to the point where now, it's hard to do anything in technology that you don't have some component of either using AI or like it's part of the product or part of some downstream process, such that it's not even a differentiator anymore. And that was kind of the intent of the piece to say like, hey, it's like saying you're a cloud company today. Like, well, of course you are. If you're a tech company, of course you use one or all the clouds, right? That's no longer a novel selling point. You're just doing it perhaps in a more efficient way and delivering it, but that doesn't mean that alone is not a selling point. But it was an early kind of investor like selling point and signal.
Yeah, right.
And I think they realized that people started realizing, that I kind of care less about how you deliver and I care more about what you deliver and like the outcome it gets me.
Yes.
AI or not, it doesn't really matter. It's the outcome I want.
And it goes back to the fundamentals again, doesn't it? Really, I mean, we know security for AI is just security. I completely agree with you. But really, we've got to address the fundamentals. We've got to try and get a grip on the data, the identity, and just bridging the data and the identity piece and having control of it and having that just-in-time access that you should be implementing. It would solve so many problems, wouldn't it? But it is a mammoth task, particularly now in the world where we're expected to put data everywhere all the time and it be continuously available, and there's a new SaaS application and it's going to generate a whole set of valuable information, and there's a whole new set of configurations we've got to understand to make sure that that's protected. And we are somewhat chasing our tails on this, but I mean, I've been talking about this now for the last dozen years. Just we've got to get grip on data and identity.
Yeah.
And for over a decade talking about it, what's been interesting in the last couple of years is I go and see clients now and they sit there and they tell me how important it is to secure the data and the identity. And I'm like, I know.
Yeah.
Here we are, full circle again. Here's another tailwind to try and get that sorted out. I hope it gets addressed.
I'm optimistic that it will. I mean, I think the ability, one of the coolest things I think I've seen, I talked to a lot of early stage companies as well, is that we can do things that like just simply weren't possible, a couple years ago. Okay. Now companies can have real ideas that can solve real problems that were just technically impossible to stitch together, or like you couldn't hire enough humans to do this.
Right.
So that's really exciting because it's identity and data and the network are all an everything problem, right? It's hard to do anything without an identity. It's hard to do something without data. And it's hard to do something not on a network of sorts, right? Yep. And so, but those are also many different shapes and sizes across, even within the same company, of how that works. And so it's really hard to kind of tie all those disparate things together. And now it's super exciting to see what's possible now that even like a year ago was not possible. So I'm just personally always optimistic about this stuff, just because I see a lot of early like optimistic startups.
Right.
So I'm excited for it personally, and I think a lot of people are as well.
Excellent. Great. Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much, Mike. This has been a fascinating conversation. I could talk about this stuff all day, and my kids are sick of it. But it's just nice to have a conversation, try and explore some of this stuff. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Brilliant. Thanks.